Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's CMS Merit Tips and Trips webinar. Our presenters for today are going to be Melissa Gross and Jake Webb. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. So this meeting is going to be recorded and it's going to be uploaded. The recording and the questions and answers will be uploaded to the pre-rulemaking resources webpage on the MMS Hub in the near future. Additionally, you'll notice that all your audio lines are muted, and they will be throughout the presentation. However, we will be addressing questions later in the presentation. If you have any questions, you'll see that on the bottom ribbon of your screen, there is a Q&A button. You can use that function to type in your question, and you just hit send to submit, and we will answer it during the meeting or include it in the questions and answers, which will be available in the near future. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mel Gross to get us started.
Thank you so much. My name is Melissa Gross, and I am the CMS task lead for pre-rulemaking activities. We hold this annual presentation in the hopes that we can help submitters get more comfortable using Merit. And what we're going to cover today is what the tool is if you are new to submitting a measure to Merit. This will be helpful, to watch the demo. We're going to discuss CMS Merit features. We're going to discuss updates for the 2025 cycle. And then we will go into our live demonstration showing you how to log in, how to create a submission, and then other functions that you can see listed here. There's a copy and paste feature. You can change information that you've saved from a previous submission. You can add or delete attachments from a prior submission, adding in components or survey-based measures into your submission, which is new this year. And then you can also view the information, that you've submitted. You can log back in and see what you've already submitted and what needs to be continually submitted afterwards. You can export and print a copy of the submission, and you can change the information that you submitted. You can also add a co-submitter. After we go through the demo, we'll share some helpful resources to help you along, this 2025 cycle. And then we will try to answer any questions, and hopefully this will help you for this year's cycle. And with that, I will pass it off to Jake. Thanks.
So much, Mel. Next slide, please. So hello, everyone. And as Mel mentioned, my name is Jake Webb, and I am the MMS pre-rulemaking task lead. Before we get into the live demo, I did just want to take a couple minutes and highlight a few slides that were from the March pre-rulemaking webinar, just in case maybe you were not able to attend, and just kind of level set everything. So what is CMS Merit? The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services MUC Entry Review Information Tool is designed for measure developers to submit their clinical quality and efficiency measures for CMS consideration. However, CMS Merit is more than just a submission tool. With login access, you can also explore the Past Candidate Measures tab, which is a repository of previous submissions. This feature allows you to filter by submission year, program, measure types, and the status of acceptance or rejection. Once the measure submission period closes, CMS programs will then use this same tool to review the measures. By using CMS Merit, this helps to facilitate a more efficient communication between CMS programs and the measure submitters during that process. CMS Merit did open for submissions on February 5th and will be closing for the 2025 submissions on Thursday, May 1st, 2025 at 8 p.m. Eastern. After this deadline, no further submissions will be accepted. And if you haven't already, I recommend adding that date to your calendar just to ensure that you submit everything you need to for that 8 p.m. deadline. Next slide, please. CMS Merit offers numerous features that help enhance the submission and review process. Automatic completeness checks ensure that all required measure information is filled out before the submission. You don't have to complete your submission all in one sitting. You can save your progress and return later, which allows you to work at your own pace without feeling rushed. Both submitters and reviewers can track the status of the submissions, which will help provide visibility into each step of the review and decision process. Designed with human-centered principles, CMS Merit features an easy-to-navigate interface for a smooth user experience. The tool also includes improved copy and paste functionality, which allows for you to transfer information from other documents into CMS Merit. An example would be is if you start with the Word version of the data template to collaborate within your team, you can then easily copy and paste that information directly into the tool. For best results, we like to recommend using the paste as plain text option to help eliminate any hidden formatting that might appear in the system. Lastly, CMS Merit does allow you to print and save a copy of your submission in a PDF format. Next slide, please. So here are some of the most notable updates to CMS Merit for the 2025 cycle. The first notable update is the organizational structure of the questions. Both the Merit data template and the CMS Merit tool now follow a structured format with sections and subsections. An example is properties as a section, while measure information is a subsection, and we'll talk about more of that later in the demo. Previously, the steward section was positioned midway through the submission process, and in 2025, the first section of questions is going to be the steward or owner section. This change helps to allow submitters to provide this information up front, similar to putting your name at the top of a paper, and also making it easier to include collaborators early on and locate those submissions. Throughout the tool, you're going to notice language updates that align with changes made across CMS over the past year. You'll see MATI language and guidance to replace the MAT and Bonnie due to the sunsetting in the summer of 2024. With this change, there's also going to be updated ECQM submission guidance language for attachment requirements. Additionally, new questions will be added for the 2025 submission cycle. CMS now will ask if any part of a measure or its use is proprietary and or licensed. If you select yes, you'll need to answer additional questions about licensing fees for CMS or measured entities and provide further explanation if necessary. And the most significant update for the 2025 submission cycle involves submissions of composite and survey measures. Previously, submitters had to enter basic high-level information into the CMS Merit tool and then attach supplemental documentation for each component or survey-based measure. Now the CMS Merit tool will allow submitters to directly input all necessary information for each component or survey-based measure into the submissions. This streamlines the submission process and ensures that all information is included in the tool, making it easier for submitters to convey measures more effectively to CMS reviewers. Next slide, please. And if you've submitted a measure for consideration last year, the slide may look familiar. Section 504 and 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 helps to ensure that those with disabilities have equal access to government information and communications technology, thereby to the government employment programs and services to which all citizens are entitled. All attachments that are submitted to CMS Merit are made available to the public to better improve transparency. Additionally, measures that are accepted to the MUC list have their attachments shared on the MMS Hub and then used by the CBE primer recommendation committees. And so by these attachments being 508 compliant, this allows for more accessibility to interested parties, which then allows for more meaningful feedback. CMS strongly recommends that all applicable submitted documents be Section 508 compliant prior to the submission of your measure to CMS Merit. I do want to note that CMS will still consider measures that are submitted to CMS Merit with attachments that are not 508 compliant. All non-compliant documents will be expected to be remediated in conjunction with the MMS team and the submitter prior to the MUC list being finalized. I've also provided some resources here on the slide, and we'll also put in the chat if you're not maybe fully familiar with the 508ing process. And if you have any questions or would like any more guidance, feel free to reach out to mmspatel@patel.org. We would be happy to assist. And next slide, please. All right, so now we're actually going to go ahead and start jumping into the live demo. And I'm going to share my screen here in just a moment. All right, and as I share my screen, we're going to start out here on the homepage of CMS Merit. So the actual homepage of Merit actually has a few resources that I just want to point out that might be helpful to you if you get stuck in your submissions or maybe just want a little extra guidance. So last year here on the top of the screen, you can see that we created a new animated video that talks about CMS Merit's purpose, some of the features, and then its role in pre-roll making. So everything that we've kind of talked about to this point is in this video. I highly recommend if you haven't seen it, it's about 8 minutes. It's a really good video and also might be helpful for any new employees that you might have to kind of orient them to the tool. Midway through the screen, you're going to see a hyperlink to the pre-roll making webpage on the MMS Hub. Here you're going to find additional resources and documents such as the 2025 CMS Program Needs and Priorities Report. You're going to find past MUC lists. You'll find frequently asked question documents that we update annually, and then other documents that might be beneficial as you're submitting your measure. You're also going to see here the Merit data template. Data template has all the same information and questions that you're going to find in the CMS Merit tool. Some people find it helpful to have this handy to see the notes or the guidance, or even just to look up where questions are a little bit easier. Also, some people like to start with this and have their group fill it out because it's easier to share a Word document between coworkers. And then once it's done, then you can use that copy and paste feature to transfer that information. You're also going to see a quick start guide. The quick start guide is going to walk you through things such as how to get your password, how to use your two-factor authentication, how to add a co-submitter. A lot of the things that I'm going to show you today is going to be in that quick start guide. So if you maybe need a refresher down the road, and you can just come to this quick start guide. And the last resource I just want to point out at the bottom of the screen is the recording of a webinar that we held early in March that went over the timelines for the submission cycle in 2025, as well as highlighting some of those changes that we talked about earlier. And if you haven't already seen the video, please check that out as well. At the top of the screen, if you click on the About, there's going to be a drop down and there's a Contact Us section. I want to point this out. If as you're going through your submission, you have questions or if you run into some technical issues, please use this mmssupport@patel.org email. That is the best way to communicate with us for a couple of different reasons. One of the main one being is if you have trouble or if something's not working correctly, you can actually screenshot it and send it to us so we can actually see what the issue is and try to be able to help support you. You can also fill out this form right here as well if you'd like, and then just fill out your first, last name, company, organization, email, and a message, and we'll get back with you. We do also offer a phone number. I do just want to mention that you will not get a live agent. That'll take you to a voicemail. So again, the best way is going to be that mmssupport@patel.org email, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Let's go ahead and actually log in. One thing I want to point out is if you don't already have a Merit account, I would highly recommend doing that sooner than later. It does take about 24 hours for your account to be created. So if you click the Request Account button, it's going to ask for some of that basic information, first, last name, company, organization, email, and phone number. And then it's going to ask you what tool you'd like access to. If you already have access to the CMIT tool, that does not guarantee that you have access to Merit. They do have separate request accounts. So if maybe back in the day you requested CMIT, but you didn't request Merit, you will have to do that. Maybe you don't have either and you'd like both, you can do that at the same time to help save a step. Once you fill out this form, you'll click the Submit Request button, and then you'll get an email within 24 hours letting you know that your account has been created and then the steps to create your two-factor authentication code. So let's go ahead and log in. So give me 1 minute as I put in my information. As I mentioned, we do have two-factor authentication. For non-CMS, you're going to use Google Authenticator, and then for CMS, you'll use your VIP access. So now that we're actually in CMS Merit, you'll see at the top the 3 different tabs. So CMS Merit is broken down into those 3 different sections. The first one is going to be My Submissions. The next is 2025 Candidate Measures. And the third is that Past Candidate Measures tab. The My Submissions tab is the default tab that you'll see when you log in. This is where you're going to see all the measures that you specifically create and submit. It's going to help separate your submissions from all the rest of the submissions just for easy navigation. So you can see here that I have 2 different measures currently that I've created. The next tab is the 2025 Candidate Measures. And this is where all the 2025 submissions are going to be listed. So you can see here, right now, we only have 2 measures submitted. And these are both example measures, but you can see this one is mine, and then this was someone that my colleague created. So this will be where you'll see all the measure submissions for that 2025 cycle. The final tab is going to be the past candidate measures. As you might remember from earlier in today's presentation, Merit is not only a submission tool, but also that repository. So here you can actually use filters and find past MUC submissions. So if I click on the filters, and let's just say I'm looking for a measure that was submitted in 2022, and it was submitted to the Hospital Inpatient Quality Reporting Program. I click the Apply Filters, you can see it went from almost 3,000 to 15 results. And here it shows the year of when it was submitted, MUC ID, title, program, measure type, steward, and if it was added to the MUC list, yes or no. You can then actually come up here to Show Hide Columns and pick and choose which tabs you would like to see. So maybe I'm not as concerned about who the measure steward is, but I would like to know description, numerator, and denominator. So as I click those, you can see that this information has changed. We have added a description, numerator, and denominator. If you would like, if this is the information you're looking for, you can actually come up here and click Export to Excel, and it'll download all these columns and results into an Excel file for you. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at submitting a new measure. So on the My Submissions page, if you look at the top right corner, you'll see a Submit a New Measure button. When you first log in, you actually might see 2 boxes in the middle of your screen that says Submit a New Measure or Submit an Existing Measure. It's the same information as if you click this button. This will be what it looks like as well. So there's 2 different options on submitting a measure. You have a Submit a Measure, which is submitting a new measure from scratch that's not been previously submitted. So this is a completely blank submission. Nothing will be filled out. Everything will be blank and very clean if you'd like to start, completely from scratch. The other option is submitting from an existing measure. This is a tool that you can use if maybe you submitted a measure maybe last year and it was rejected, and you did some extra testing, and maybe you needed to update the numerator, denominator, but you don't want to start completely from scratch. You can use this feature to search using the repository for that past submission and pull it to the front, and it'll actually auto-generate some of that information from last year's submission. Then you would just go in and update the sections that need updated, as well as answering any new questions that have been added from this year. Something I do also like to mention is that, every year we kind of update the data template based off of new needs and ideas. And sometimes we do our best to kind of translate from one language to another, but we always recommend that you, as you're going through the process, that you just make sure that everything has migrated over and it still makes sense and it's exactly how you wanted it. So even though it auto generates, please just review and make sure that everything looks correct. It also does not translate over attachments. So if last year you had a submission and you had attachments, you will have to re-upload those this year to your submission. So I am going to already created a demo measure, which is this demo measure 1. So I'm going to click on the edit button. So here on the left-hand side, you're going to see a navigation bar. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see, as we were talking about, here is the section of steward and owner, and then subsections such as the steward or owner information, measure developer information, and submitter information. Each of these have a section and subsections, and if you click the plus or minus, it'll have the accordion file to open and close. You're also going to see green check marks and a pencil. The pencil means that you are still working on that section. It means it's not fully complete and that there's something that still needs to be addressed. If you see a green check mark, it's showing that that section has been completed, you've met all the requirements, and all the required questions have been addressed. Here to the right of that, you're going to see the MUC ID and the title. Update the title. If you come to properties and measure information, it should be the first question asked. So what you would do is just type in your title here and click save, and it would automatically update this for you. To the right of the MUC ID and title, you're going to see 2 buttons. One is to delete a measure. Maybe you just want to restart from scratch. You can just click that delete measure and it'll erase everything. There's also an export measure button that, as we mentioned, once you are done with your submission or at any time, you can click that button and it'll download a PDF document. Because it is a PDF document, you can't go in and change information on it. So we do highly recommend that once you're done with your submission and you've submitted it, that's the best time to do that export. But as I mentioned, you can do it anytime you would like. Just below it, we have a save button. We actually have one at the top and at the bottom. And these are very important because CMS Merit does not automatically save your information. So as you fill out a section, it does not automatically save. So what we like to recommend is if there's a really big section that you've been working on, it's always better to save more than less. But you can also, if you go through and you fill out this one subsection, if you click the save and continue, it'll actually save and move you to the next section. So it's almost like a built-in process. So if you just remember at the end of your page, click the save and continue, it'll save that section and move you to the next one. Something I do want to mention is that in the past, if CMS Merit does have an inactivity timeout, and in the past, it's been about 15 minutes. So if you have login to CMS Merit and you step away from your computer for 15 minutes, it does automatically log you out. This year, it actually has been updated to 60 minutes. So you now have 60 minutes of inactivity before it logs out. So we do still recommend, if you feel like you're going to have to step away for longer than an hour, to definitely make sure you save, because if it does log you out, it still doesn't save anything. There is also a note here we have on every page, and this is just a note reminding you, if you're going to use the copy and paste functionality, as I mentioned, maybe you work in the data template and now you're going to paste it into the form here. It's always best to use that paste as plain text, because sometimes the system, when you click the traditional paste, it's going to collect and show some hidden formatting characters that you might not necessarily see at the beginning. But when you click submit and you click the export, it's going to come up in those fields. So you might see some like blank boxes or spaces that you didn't necessarily add or show in your original form. It's just something that the system captures. So by pasting as plain text, you're helping eliminate those and just help making a cleaner submission. You're also going to see here a red asterisk, and these are going to be noting if a field is required. So anytime you see a red asterisk that is required for a submission, if you don't have that field filled out and you try to submit, it will stop you. You're also going to see a view definition button. Every section has this, and this is just going to talk about what we are looking for in your submission at this spot. It's the same thing as the guidance in the Word template or in the data template. Here for the measure steward or owner, you can see that the guidance is to enter the current measure steward or owner. Typically, this is an organization or other agency, institution, or entity name. So if you're not 100% sure what to put here, definitely check out the view definitions button. We have a mix of text boxes and multiple choice selections. On text boxes, if you don't see a word count, limit below, it automatically defaults to 4,000 characters. So in this case, it doesn't say a character limit, so it would be 4,000. There are some instances, if I come to the characteristics, there are some instances where based off of what you selected for a question, multiple questions might pop up after. So in this question right here, where it's asking if this measure is in the CMS measures inventory tool or CMIT, if I click yes, a follow-up question comes and asks us to put in what is that CMIT ID. So then I would just fill in that information. So there are going to be some instances with based on how you answer, follow-up questions will come. So let's say that maybe you have a measure that's a composite or a survey. As I mentioned earlier, new to this year, you can actually put that information directly into the tool. So if I come to measure information, there's going to be a question just a couple down that's asking if this measure is a composite, survey, and or a paired measure. This is not necessarily a new question. We've had this in the past, but what's new is based on how you answer will tell the system if it needs more questions or not. So for this example, if I click yes, that this is a composite measure, and if you click composite or survey, it's going to look the exact same. So don't worry about that. But in just this example, we'll use composite. It's going to mention down here, if you choose one of those, what you'll need to do is click save. Then you're going to see some new tabs appear at the top. So I've clicked yes, this is a composite measure. And if I come up here and click save, it takes a moment or two to generate, but what you're going to see is two new tabs appear at the top. The first one is going to be the general information, all the information that we've been filling out already. And then the second tab is where you're going to put in those components or survey-based measures. You can see here up at the top, you have the first tab, which is composite. And as I just mentioned, that's all the information that we've just been originally putting in. So, steward or owner, some of the property information. And then that second tab is the components or survey-based measures. This is where you would put all the components or all the survey-based measures that you have. And you can see here that it automatically generates the first one. But as I mentioned, you can add as many as you need for your measure. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this one real quick. It's going to look almost exactly the same as a traditional submission. The biggest thing that you're going to notice that's different is there's a bunch of sections over here on the left that are grayed out. This is because we worked with CMS to identify what fields and what questions would need to be answered just at the component or survey-based measure level. Some information like steward or owner that we can get from that original composite first tab that we don't need, again, duplicated. So this is supposed to help eliminate some burden. So you can see here for component or surveys, you have some information in properties and characteristics. It's going to look exactly the same as you can see the pencil. So it looks like we're still working on this section. And as you complete it, you'll see some green check marks to help you identify that you've filled out everything that you need. You're going to see up here that it automatically generates a title of component or survey-based measure. The very first question, it's actually going to ask you, what the title is. So let's say in this case, it's just a component measure. So I'm just going to take out component for the or survey-based measure and call it component measure number 1. You can see as I do that, it automatically changes up here. And then you would just want to make sure you click save to have it save. And then, as I mentioned, you just fill it out, add this in for as many measures as you need. And then once that's all complete, you come back to the other tab and finish your submission. For the sake of this demonstration, I am going to say that this is not a composite or survey-based measure. So I'm going to click that and click save so it'll take those tabs off. And so as that loads, the next thing I just want to touch base on is going to be the attachments. So we'll give that a moment to load here. And so as we move to the attachment section, again, I just want to reiterate the notion of if possible and if applicable, please submit all the attachments 508 compliant. And CMS will still accept them if they are not 508 compliant. We will just work to make sure that they get 508 compliant before the publication of the MUC list. Here on the attachment page, We do have some information about the sunsetting of the Matt and Bonnie, and with it being replaced by Maddie. This was something that you might have saw last year. We decided to keep it in because it is still fairly new. So if you have any questions or need any guidance on the Maddie submission process or the tools, there's some links here as well. We also have a downloadable measure information and justification form. So if this is something you would like to fill out, you can click the download form and it'll generate for you. It's also found on the MMS Hub if that's where you found it as well. It's the same form. If you scroll down, you're going to see that this is where you will add attachments. So one of the things that we do is you can upload as many attachments as you need for your submission. There is a limit per upload of 25 megabytes. So if you have one paper that is 25 megabytes or 5 papers that total 25 megabytes, you can do that in one upload. As I mentioned, you can have as many attachments as you need. It's just based on the upload at a time. So you might have to upload 2 or 3 times or once. Once everything's uploaded, you can, maybe you uploaded something in early April and a couple weeks later you found out that you needed to change something. Here you can see I have a demo MIF document. If I wanted to change it, I would just click change and re-upload with the most up-to-date current document. Or maybe say you decide that you don't want it anymore, you can just click the delete button and it'll remove it for you. Something new to this year as well is we've added a drop-down box for attachment label. And what this is essentially going to do is sometimes when we see attachments, we've had a comment section, which we still have, that we've asked that submitters, kind of briefly explain, maybe what this attachment is. Sometimes the title does a really great job. If it's a MIF form, it'll say it's a MIF. But sometimes it's just a little kind of tricky for reviewers to maybe fully understand what the document is. So by having this drop-down feature, there's a couple of selections, and you just choose maybe what the best field is based off of your submission. In this case, I have a MIF form, so I click the measure information form. There is also an other. So if it doesn't fit with one of those categories, you can just put other and then, briefly explain what it is. Submitter comments is a section that we have that maybe you have information that just doesn't fit in one of the submission questions we have before, or maybe you submitted last year and were rejected, and you got some guidance on maybe what you needed to address and you'd like to provide that. This is just a section that you can put any information that you feel is relevant that you would like the reviewers to know, and as I mentioned, or even elaborate if there's like something you submitted earlier but you'd like to elaborate a little bit more. This is that spot. It is optional, so you don't feel like you are obligated to have to fill it out. It's just if you'd like to add additional information, it's there. So let's say that you feel that you've completed everything and that you are ready for submission. If you click the review and submit button, the first thing it's going to have you do is it's going to check for submission for errors. So it's going to run a check to make sure that you've completed every field, everything looks correct based off of what it sees. If I run that, it's telling me that it looks like that I missed a field. It looks like that I had an incomplete submission, and it looks like my missing information was measure information, measure description. You can also tell up here, you can see the red triangle. You can either click here and it'll take you directly to that spot, or you can just use the navigation bar. And once it loads, if you scroll, it'll actually tell you in a big red box that this is what's missing. So it actually will help you see, what's missing. And it does look like I missed the measure description. So I'm just going to put demo in, and you see as you type in information, that box does disappear. And once I click save, if everything is complete, we should see that red box go away, and it should turn to a green check mark. So let's double check to make sure that everything is complete. All right, and it looks like that is a green check mark now. So it does look like everything is complete. So if I come back to the review and submit, it's going to tell me that the error check is complete and that there was no errors found. So now we are able to submit our measure. So I would click the submit measure, and then it would take us back to the My Submissions. So I'll go ahead and click the Submit Measure button. And it takes just a moment here. And now you can see that the measure is complete. And it's going to have, if you maybe are submitting multiple measures, you can then start on the next measure. I'm going to come back up here to My Submissions. And now let's talk about, if once you're submitting a measure and it's submitted, kind of what's the next steps and what to expect. After you submit a measure and we get to that deadline of May 1st, starts to go through a review process. It goes through a initial kind of QC check to make sure that everything looks great, that the system caught them, that you've submitted all the required fields, making sure that the logic makes sense, and just making sure little things like that. From there, it then goes to CMS for their program reviews. Throughout this whole review process, there might be times where the reviewers maybe want to ask a clarification question, might need to ask you to update your submission based off of what you've selected and things like that. And how that comes is via a comment that they put on your measure. You then should get an email notification that a comment has been made to your measure selection. So you'll log in, and then this is kind of what you'll see. So on this demo measure 2, if you scroll to the bottom here, there's an activity section. And you can see here that it looks like a reviewer has asked me to provide a more descriptive measure description. So what I would then do is I would come up here and click the Request Change button. This Request Change button is going to be after you submit a measure, any change that you would like to make, you have to request. So you can see here that it looks exactly the same. The only differences that you're going to see is in the navigation bar, you're going to see a comment bubble, which is going to show you where that comment is. And then you're also going to see on the right-hand side a change request button. And you're going to see that on every question that you have. So I'm going to come to the properties, and I'm going to come to this measure information where that comment is. Once it pops up, if you scroll to the bottom, you're going to see the comment. So again, here's the exact same comment to provide a more descriptive measure description. I'm going to find where the measure description is, which is right here, and I'm going to click the Change Request button. What that is going to do is that's going to show you the original that you submitted. It's going to come up with a field for a new value, and then it's going to have a field for you to put the reason for your change request. So I'm going to put that this is a demo measure. And then the reason for change, I'm just going to put that this was requested by reviewer. Once this information is put in, I'm going to click that Submit Change Request. It's going to then say that all changes are subject and for review and approval by CMS programs. So you're just going to say Submit. And then what that is going to do is that's going to send that change back to the reviewer who made the comment for them to review and approve that change. What I like to do is I like to recommend that once you've made that change, that you come back to this main page and you come back to this reply button. That's where the comment is. And I like to just say, the change has been made. This just helps me, in my eyes, kind of make sure that I've completed all the comments, and that also again sends that notification to the program. All right. The last thing I just wanted to touch base with before we go into the Q&A is just the notion of, once you've submitted, how to keep track of where your submission is. If you look here on the My Submissions page, about the middle of the screen, you're going to see these bubbles. This is actually going to show you where it is in the review process. So that first bubble says in progress, and that's going to be when you are creating your measure. So prior submission, you'll see it in progress. Once you have submitted, you're going to see it go to that first and second level review. This is that review that we do a quality check, make sure everything looks great and it's updated. All the attachments are there. From there, it then goes to CMS review. CMS review then is where the programs will decide the decisions. And then from there, you'll then see if it's accepted or rejected. So this My Submission page will show you, every step of the way, and then this is also where you'll see your decision. So with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing, and then we can go to the Q&A.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jake. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the Q&A segment. And again, if you would like to submit a question, you can go ahead and just click on that Q&A button and type in your question. So our first question here, can you remind me what the deadline for measure submission is?
Yes. So yeah, that deadline is 8 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, May 1st. I am going to mention that Patel will have a staff member available up to that 8 p.m. deadline just to help with any troubleshooting issues. So if things come up while you're submitting, you can definitely reach out to us. With that being said, please, don't wait until that last day to start your submission, just in case things do arise. As we mentioned, once that deadline closes, submissions will no longer be accepted, or submissions can't be changed after that submission without a request by CMS.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jake. Our next question, is there a prompt or an alert that will inform you to save information if you move to the next section without saving?
Yeah, that's a good question. So CMS Merit does not have that prompt or alert that reminds you to save. That's why it is important to make sure that as you finish a section that you click that save or that save and continue button. It doesn't tell you, like if you go to the next section, a reminder to save. So yeah, it's very important, that save and continue button.
Okay, great. Next, can you re-clarify that if I type my responses in Word and paste them into CMS Merit, will the system retain my text formatting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So CMS Merit does support text formatting. And with that being said, it should always be that best practice that once you paste and save to review what you pasted to make sure that it came out the exact way that you wanted it to. Sometimes there are instances where, as I mentioned, those hidden figures in your text will show up as, like random symbols or things like that will need to be removed. So as we mentioned, just the best way to do that is, to put your information in, save, and then just to review to make sure that it has saved the way that you are expecting it to.
Great. We have another question here. So is there a limit for the number of documents I can attach to my submission or a file size limit for attachments?
Yep. So there is no limit to the amount of attachments. We recommend the amount that you need for your submission. As I mentioned, there is that limit to 25 megabytes as file size of an attachment. So if you have one attachment that is 30 megabytes, unfortunately, you won't be able to upload that. You'd have to either break it out or make it a little bit smaller to fit in that form. The only thing that you would have to remind yourself is if you can only upload 25 megabytes at a time. So again, if that's one attachment or five, but you can upload as many as you want. It's just a matter of uploading into the system.
Awesome. And then we have another question here. So is there a sample of a submission available?
Yeah, so I think we don't necessarily have an example. We could definitely, provide you one. I think the best thing is just like that past measure submissions repository, because you can see how the past were submitted. So I would recommend that. But if you would like to email us, we could also discuss that a little bit further as well.
Okay, great.
Hi, I am so sorry to jump in. I was thinking for that question, even though it's not a sample of a submission, I don't know, Carrie, if you think the merit template would be helpful and along the lines of what you're looking for. Feel free to speak up or not, but I was just thinking that maybe that template will, kind of be the most helpful if you don't have a previous submission to look at. Thanks.
That's a point too, yes. So yeah, like the data template that was on the home screen, that does have all the questions that are going to be asked. So that is a very good point too, of kind of like the questions that would be on the data or on the merit submission.
Thank you, Jake and Mel. And then Mel, I think we have a question here for you. Someone noted that they got a notification last year asking, after their initial submission, asking for additional testing data in support of their mock submission. So we just want to confirm if that's part of the annual protocol now.
Hi. Yes, that's a great question. And thanks for reaching out about that. There's a couple things that, I wanted to kind of address with this question is there is additional testing that will be requested, and that is for the consensus-based entity or the Partnership for Quality Measurement powered by Battelle that will request that additional testing. And that's only for purposes of the pre-rulemaking measure review under the CBE work, not related to necessarily the MUC review, like the measures under consideration review. If you are thinking that your submission is not going to be complete and you want to submit late data, we ask that you only submit a completed submission by that May 1 deadline. So there is no opportunity to submit late data for purposes of, the CMS programs reviewing those measure submissions for the measures under consideration list. I hope that answers the question. If not, please, feel free to speak up and we can discuss it further.
Thank you so much, Mel. Next question. Is there a window of time after which you cannot change the attachments you have submitted?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, if you say you submit in your measure right now, any changes that come before that May 1st deadline, you can change. You just have to go to that submit change, but we can make those updates. Once it comes after that May 1st deadline, everything is subject to CMS decision. So you can put the request in, and then it's up to the program lead to, allow if they would accept it or not. So it's kind of like a case by case basis based on how the program has responded. So, I think, again, as kind of Mel just mentioned, please try to submit everything that you can at that May 1st deadline. And then, anything after, if there may be things that CMS would like, maybe the follow up or like additional resources, you can then provide those. But after that May 1st deadline, everything has to go through the CMS program approval process.
All right, wonderful. And we've got another question here. Is there an estimate of how long it takes to complete all the questions for a submission?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it really depends on the submission. I think, there are different factors in, how, the submitter wants to approach. But I think, we always recommend to do it sooner than later just because of that decision. I think it depends on, how detailed your measure is and, things like that. So definitely, as I mentioned, it's better to start early. And then, that's also where that beneficial save and continue feature comes in handy, that you don't have to do it all in one sitting. But we do recommend, definitely doing it sooner before that May 1st deadline if this is your first year, just to kind of get that idea based off of what your measure is.
Thank you for that, Jake. And then I think there's one more question in here. I'm just asking whether just about the platforms that we have available and wondering whether Merit and CMIT share the same login information and how to get assistance with troubleshooting any issues they're having with the system.
Yeah, so Merit and CMIT do have the same username and password. As I mentioned, if maybe you had a CMIT account but you didn't register for Merit, that you do have to request them separately. But in this case, if you maybe had a Merit and a CMIT account in the past and it's not working, if you reach out to the MMS support at patel.org, we can definitely help you get that account set up. Maybe it maybe just has been like like it's been a little while since you've logged in and it just needs rebooted. But if you just email that MMS support at patel.org, we can definitely help you get that account set back up and see what's going on.
Thank you, Jake. I'm just scanning here to see if we have any more unanswered questions. Okay. So here's another one. So just looking for some clarification about testing information coming in after May 1st. So is there another chance, just to clarify, is there another chance in August, September to submit additional testing data as discussed in the prior webinar? And I think you started talking about this before, Mel, if you could take
Hi,
this.
yeah. Yes, I can answer this. So we want complete submissions by May 1. We don't accept any late testing data if the measure is not complete in August or September. What is asked of measure submitters for the measures under consideration list, those measures go through the CBE review known as primer or the pre-rulemaking measure review. In those instances, those measures and CMS can request for additional testing data to help the primer committees review those measures. Hopefully that helps clarify. But in terms of late testing data to kind of fulfill your measure submission, we do not accept that. Thanks.
Wonderful. So I'm just looking through just for any late breaking questions. And I think we have addressed everything in here. So thank you all so much for taking the time to join today's webinar. We hope that the information was valuable. Again, the recording and the Q&As will be posted to the MMS Hub in the near future, and feel free to reach out to us at mmssupport@patel.org with any additional questions or concerns. Everyone have a wonderful rest of the day.